Hello, everyone. All right, I think it's a really good time to look at where we're at and where we're headed. Uh, and a lot of this corresponds to, of course, the reading to do. I'm finding it easier to do this than trying to put it somehow into learn and so forth and so on. This is more the style of what I'm used to with lectures. So in this ASP book, what we've done so far, besides covering chapter 2, which is how to learn a new language, Ruby, which we did in week 1, is since we started up with Rails, is we've covered, this notion of let's talk about our 3-tier architecture, talk about the notion of RESTful APIs. I'm going to talk more about REST later in the course. We're going to come back to it for a more in-depth look, although the basics you already have. All right. We've gone over the model view controller. We've looked at how to make models in Rails, how to do basic querying and things with Active Record. Then you got homework 6 out. All right. And it's this Rails CRUD, the basic books homework. There's a lot there using a single model, single books model. I guess it's a book model, and the entity, the table, is books. And we show, this structure of how we go with basic resource routing in a RESTful way to create, read, update, and destroy or delete our objects. And the way that it goes through the controller and the view, and we utilize our model then to handle those things. And there's a lot of small parts there that all add up to a functioning application. And so most of that homework, as you'll note, is to read and understand, do the things to build the system. And then there's some small tasks. There, you may not find them small, so my apologies if you don't. But there's some tasks at the end to put into motion that some of this understanding that you should be gaining by going through the assignment. So one of the things is that we now need to move ahead, and we need to talk in more detail about some of the concepts that have already been covered here in a first pass form, and you're seeing on homework 6 and explained to you on homework 6. So it's not homework 6 isn't testing you, it's actually it's largely tutorial teaching you as well. But we're going to reinforce that with some lecture material and some reading. So in section 4.4 of the book, you've got routes, controllers, views. I'll be talking about that next. Then we've got forms. So these are HTML forms, but we make them in Rails, as you see in homework 6, using a form with command and other various Rails commands to generate our forms so that they work well with our models. So we'll talk about that. I might not spend many time talking in a lecture about debugging, but you should absolutely read 4.8. Perhaps I will spend some time, but look, really, I truly think the way to debug, I'm just going to tell you right now, use by bugs. Stick it anywhere you need to figure out what's going on. Also, go turn to that Rails console, and you can do all sorts of things to try out code. It's just like the IRB, the interactive Ruby system. So but it's connected into Rails, and so you can access your models, the database, all those sorts of things from the console. And it's a super handy way to try to be like, what's going on? Or did I write this method correctly? And to try some things out. Anyways, I've just done the debugging part. Anyways, then the big thing to get in is to talk about associations and foreign keys. This is sections 5.4. 5.4 is the really big one, and then there's also 5.5 and 5.6, which go into further detail for you about these matters. We're going to cover a lot. You're going to see a lot of this on homework 7. Homework 7, so basic books. went with a single table. Now I'm going to say, look, we've got this much larger schema that we really want to use. How do we build all the models that are going to overlay this schema for us and have things wired up and connected correctly in Active Record? And what are our models and how do we do this? So the big thing there is associations and how do these work and so forth and so on. Also gives more examples of creating the models, being able to have them in the database and so forth and so on. So that's what homework 7 ends up being. Then we're going to move on, and a real big thing is to talk about partial validations and filters. These are combined in particular with forms to allow us to have much better handling of user input, to only allow certain values, to send the user back to the form when there's something wrong, to give you a lot of that functionality you're used to on websites. And how do we do that in Rails? How do we, with partials, how do we avoid duplicating work? With filters the same way. So you're going to see a lot more advanced and better cleaning up of how to work with this CRUD model in homework 8. So I also draw this arrow homework 8 back because basically homework 8 shows us, we put together a small but working application, and we kind of get to see a lot of the concepts again. Again, all this material is cumulative. We can't function without learning and building upon the prior stuff. And so the same thing goes with, you've learned the SQL and the database, your database design, your Ruby, all these sorts of things. We build upon it all. To get these applications built, we need to hold it all in mind. What comes after this? Well, after homework 8, there's another test, test 2. Then after test 2, we have the final project. There's no final exam, so we have a final project, and you build out based upon our description of a working system. We give you a specification and wireframe mock-ups of the way it's supposed to look and so forth. You have to figure out what its scheme is going to be, what's the entity relationships, what are all the routes, how are you going to put it all together? You're going to build this app, and it is a substantial amount of work, but it's also part of that is because it touches upon everything that you've learned in the course so far. You have to put it all together. So what will I be lecturing on during that time? Additional topics. I'll probably be during that time also coming back to REST, other aspects of software design, and things that we can use to round out the course. All right. One thing I wanted to note is that the book does have at the end of each of these chapters, they have these fallacies and pitfalls. You should absolutely read them. That's really useful material to avoid making mistakes. They sort of are like gotchas, watch out for this. Likewise, throughout the text, he's got self-test questions. You should be able to read the self-test question and try to figure out what is really going on. It's designed to get you engaged and make sure that you're understanding the material. So you could do the self-test questions based upon what I'm covering, what's in the book, and so forth and so on. I have noted, you will see in homework 6, that the material he has for forms is valid except for the fact that he writes everything with a form 4 or something. Rails has all gone to a form with now, and we have it with a model or with a URL. So the general notion of everything there is good, all right? So it's still worth looking at, but for copying code, you'll want to look at a more modern resource with regard to Rails 5 or Rails 6. So the conceptual notion, everything is absolutely fine. Same thing goes for the whole book. Conceptually, there's no problem. It's just that some of the Rails stuff is a little dated because it was written for Rails 4 rather than Rails 5 and 6. We're on Rails 6. We're on Ruby 3. It's important to stay up to date with the latest versions of things for security fixes, and to be sure that everything works when we deploy them, because all the online systems stay up to date as well. And so I'm keeping the materials that you're using to be the latest versions, so that we are able to always stay compatible with things and not run into problems. Okay. So that's where we are. That's where we're headed. You can basically think of 4.4, 4.6, 4.8, and these sections of Chapter 5 as where we're going here in, I guess we're in week 8 now. Great, and that will give us the foundation for this homework 7. Then in the next week, week 9, we'll cover these partials, validations, and maybe be able to get into hopefully some other material that's interesting, and be all set for homework 8, which then leads us to, the test and then final project, and then we're done. All right.